Now let's talk a little bit about the actual, what's going to be steering this. So, drawing a blank on the name for a second. Irma's out here in the Atlantic. High pressure is what you see here in the red. So remember, clockwise flow around high pressure. This is the upper level flow out over the Atlantic right now. So Irma is kind of following the southern side of that area of high pressure as it stands right now. As we head on into the weekend, and let me see where I put in my pauses here. So this is my time stamp dropped off. Let me fix that real quick. And I think, though, this is paused on Sunday. We're going to take a look at it. And actually, that's probably beyond Sunday. But just give me a moment here, and I'll fix my time stamp. All right, so let me just do it this way. So, again, here's a look now. Here we are Monday. There's Irma. Here's the area of high pressure up to the north of it. As we head towards Tuesday into Wednesday, what starts to happen, a couple of things here. The area of high pressure is still here, kind of pushing it off to the west. But that area of high pressure is starting to maybe erode a little bit on its southern side. And then there's also a big trough developing over the United States. That's the cold front we're talking about that will move through here during the day on Wednesday. Now, as we go forward some more, as we head into Thursday, you can see this high pressure is still here. And this is one of the key features where the European and the GFS differ. It's on the strength of this area of high pressure. That's going to have a big influence on how far west this thing is able to get as we go forward through time. Now, as we hit Friday, as this trough is coming off the East Coast, that's going to tend to try and weaken this area of high pressure. What happens on the GFS is it says this trough is essentially deep enough and strong enough to pull at Irma and starts to draw it up to the north. Okay, so that's why the GFS has it turning a little bit sooner than what the European does. Now, let me pull up the European, and I'm probably going to have to fix my time stamp on this as well. I was making a few changes to this graphic right before we started this, and I made one little mistake that has that time stamp disappear. So let me fix that, and then we will take a look at what the European does. So on the European, here we are. We'll go forward in time, and let's get to about Wednesday. So here we are on Wednesday. The system is near the northern Leeward Islands. Strong area of high pressure to its north. And much like the GFS, we've got a very deep trough, very strong trough. This is a significant trough for the month of September over the eastern half of the United States. In other words, that's going to deliver a fairly potent cold front during the middle part of the week. Should deliver us a pretty decent cool down by the end of next week. We're talking about, we're going to have a little taste of fall the way it looks by the end of next week as that cold front moves on through. Now, as we head toward the end of the week, can you see how for a little while it's almost got the high pressure moving along with Irma here? That kind of keeps it going to the west. But also notice by Friday, the Europeans got Irma down here, and the trough is already starting to lift out along the East Coast. So as we advance that some more, here's our trough now as we head towards the following weekend. It has basically left Irma behind. It has not picked it up and just taken it north, out to sea, or right up the East Coast. What we get into at that point, on the European model at least, looks like to me, is as we head towards about a week from now, or a little more than a week from now, the steering currents are going to be much weaker. So we're already talking about a 10-day forecast, big uncertainty. Now you start tossing in steering currents getting a bit weaker. That only makes the uncertainty this big going forward. So where it ends up from here, we're pretty confident it'll be near the northern Leeward Islands in about 5 days, and even fairly confident it'll go somewhere in this general area, probably, give or take, okay, a couple of 100 miles, but somewhere in the general vicinity of some part of the Bahamas by the end of next week. Beyond that, it is still, and I know it's not what people like to hear, but it is still too soon to really speculate much more than that. Just to give you a look at, I know some of you like to look at the spaghetti plots. Here are the spaghetti plots. I prefer personally, especially when we're talking about long-term forecasts, to look mainly at the GFS and European models, the so-called global models, as opposed to these. But same general trend, a little bit of a turn to the west-southwest, bending back to the west-northwest near the Leeward Islands, and then either tracking near or just north of the Bahamas by the end of next week. Then we can look at, if you were with me yesterday, and I'm going to show you the European version here in a moment, but I showed you yesterday the European ensembles. So for the GFS and the European, we get a main model run from it. I showed you those two, but the modelers have also designed it where they go in and they tweak the initial conditions of the atmosphere or the initial conditions of the storm. And in the case of GFS, they run it an additional 20 times with slightly different simulations. Those are our GFS ensembles. The European gets run an additional 50 times roughly, and we get 50 different simulations. It gives us a better idea of the range of possibilities instead of focusing on one single model track or run. So here's what the GFS ensembles show right now. Each line is one of those variants on the main track. And even in the world of ensembles, this is decent agreement when you're talking about a week forecast right now, a forecast that goes out a week in time. So generally, again, they have it near or just north of the Bahamas. But remember, if we were to extend this out farther in time, most of these then have it turning north as it gets closer to the East Coast. Now, unfortunately, because the European rolls out into the early afternoon, I don't have the latest version of the ensembles to show you right now. This is the version from last night. The European only gets run twice a day, once in the evening, once in the morning. So this is yesterday evening's version of the ensembles, but it gives you an idea of the spread, especially as we get out here towards days 9 and 10, and the uncertainty. Now, last night's ensembles, the red line, if you can make out the red line, that is the main model track, the primary European model. All the other thinner lines are representative of the ensemble tracks, the different possibilities. And I think I had seen somebody that actually did the calculation on this. On last night's run, the European had something like 30% of its ensembles that did eventually get Irma into the Gulf of Mexico. So that tells us we can't rule that out as of yet, but it's certainly not the most likely scenario, and not one we can be real confident in, but it at least tells us that there's somewhat of a chance that this thing could eventually make it into the Gulf of Mexico based on last night's run. We'll get those new ensembles. They should be rolling in here in the next hour or so. I will try to post a version of this on my Facebook page in case you want to take a look at that. But again, what I would encourage you here, and I know it goes against human nature, but try not to focus too much on run to run. These things, it's going to keep changing here the next several days. It may not be until the early to mid part of next week that we have an idea if there's any real threat to the Gulf of Mexico or even the United States, okay? Through the weekend, I would say considerable uncertainty is going to continue in terms of Irma. All right, that's largely what I wanted to cover with Irma. I will get back to your questions here, any questions you may have coming up in a second. Sorry, I forgot to bring that up a little bit bigger, so you may be able to see us a little better now. But last night's European model track, what I can tell you, if you remember, here's where it was last night's model. The one that's come in this morning has certainly shifted a little bit farther west, closer to Florida, if you wanted to look for a trend.